Rig exercises, core trainer module. So the core trainer, landmine or rotation anchor, depending on what you want to call it, it's a great piece of equipment to protect the corners of your gym from damage. Users wanting to perform rotation or pressing exercises will push an Olympic bar into the corner, as you see with the image in the background, and perform these exercises with disregard to the damage it will cause. The telltale-looking mouse hole is usually evidence that one or more gym users are performing this practice. So intensity. There are three main ways to increase intensity when using the core trainer. The first is to simply add more load as weight plates to the end of the bar. The second is to increase the lever arm, which can be accomplished using a core handle attachment as shown in the background. For exercises like rotation, this will increase the distance of the bar from the hips, which is the pivot point, and this will increase the lever length. So the rotators of the body will have to work harder to move the same weight on the You can see this increase in lever length as the red arrows on the images shown between the standing rotations, which is the top image, and then the standing rotations with the core handle, which is the lower image. If you perform the same exercise with the same load, in this case just the weight of the bar, with the core handle and that extra lever length, you're going to find that the bar suddenly feels a lot. Now the third way is to adjust the angle of the bar, and the more vertical the bar, generally the easier the exercise is going to be. The more horizontal the bar, then the harder it's going to be. And a good example of this is the shoulder press exercise, which is commonly performed in the gym. So if you position yourself so that the bar becomes more vertical, which is what happens when you're doing like a standing press, then it's going to be a lot easier. And we see this a lot. People prefer to kind of do it in a standing position, and that way they can add a lot more weight plates onto it, and it just looks more impressive. But if you kind of actually position yourself in more of a horizontal position, so if you get yourself into a seated position or a supine position, then you're going to find that the weight of the bar becomes a lot heavier. Generally, the more horizontal the bar, then the more you're working vertically against gravity. The more vertical the bar is, if you're doing like something like a press, then you're kind of pressing at 90 degrees to gravity. So in this case, you'd be kind of pressing towards that upright. So gravity really is doing most of the work. It's kind of taking all the weight on the actual kind of bar. It just means you don't have to do as much. But yeah, general principle, more horizontal the bar, harder it is, more vertical the bar, the easier it's going to be. So in application for that, we'll show you some of the key exercises, in this case rotations, and some of the variations. So the first one we have then is just standing rotations. And you can do this kind of one or two ways. Some people like to kind of keep their hips perfectly fixed and then just rotate through the torso. This usually will reduce the range of motion. Or as you kind of see with the video here, we can kind of allow the hips to move and twist, which is generally what you see when you actually rotate in the real world. So that's what we normally would advocate. So this is going to be working hip rotators, in particular the rotators of the core, but you're also going to be working the upper body, in particular the shoulders, holding the bar in front of you. So as a variation to that, then we can add the handle. So as we said, the lever arm is going to be increased, and therefore whatever weight you had previously on the bar is going to be increased just with that extra lever arm. So changing body positions, then we can also take ourselves into more of a horizontal bar position, lower ourselves down towards the ground so we can perform the same motion kneeling. And like I say, the more horizontal the bar position, the harder that's going to be. And generally with the kind of rotations, we want to try to maintain a slight elbow bend, but we want to try to avoid, if at all possible, excessive flexing and bending of the arm. We want to focus on trying to get as much rotation of the torso as possible. So that's in addition to kneeling, then we can also perform the same motion split kneeling. So what we're doing here is up on one foot at the front, up on the knee at the back. This is what we call a split kneeling position. So again, just that same torso rotation. The nice thing about these kneeling and split kneeling positions is that it provides a slightly different stimulus to the rotator of the core, rather than just always doing it in a seated. And then here we see the kind of lowest position we get into with rotations. So sat on the ground, legs extended out in front. And marking the video here, as you're seeing, he's maintaining that slight elbow bend, but all of the movement is occurring through that rotation of the torso. And when you're standing, okay, that 10 kilos may not be a significant amount, but once you get down into a seated position, the 10 kilos becomes pretty challenging. Now we can also use the core trainer for a variety of upper body exercises. This would include the press, and we'll show you a few different variations of this. We can also do lateral presses, shoulder to shoulder press, bent over rows, diagonal upright rows, and diagonal high pulls, and we'll go through each of these one at a time. So one of the standard exercises you see a lot of people perform then is our standing press. So along with rotations, this is one of the key, probably 2 or 3 that you ever see anybody ever perform. They'll always do it in a standing position because it means they can add more weight to it, because the bar is generally more vertical and it just looks more impressive. Going to be working obviously the delts, triceps, a little bit of lateral core, but it's a really straightforward exercise. Then we have our split kneeling press. So again, following the same kind of body position variation that we saw with rotations, we can get down into a split kneeling position, so on one knee and on one foot. And again, in a more horizontal position now with the bar, so lower down to the ground, this is going to get a little bit more challenging with the same weight. Now with a lot of these pressing movements, you see we're not pressing perfectly vertically, it's more of a kind of diagonal press halfway between a vertical press and a horizontal press. And we can take that all the way down into a seated press position, again facing the core trainer or landmine and pressing, in this case as you see, a little bit more vertically upwards. You're always going to be pressing slightly forwards, but it's as you become lower to the ground and as the bar becomes more horizontal, then you're going to find you push forwards a little bit less and you push up. Other exercises then, we can perform this lateral press, which is effectively positioning yourself sideways on, so 90 degrees to the core trainer, and then again performing this press upwards. We're doing this in a split kneeling position initially. I'll show you another variation in a second, but it's yeah, a little bit more medial deltoid. The other variation, a little bit more anterior deltoid. You're going to get a little bit more lateral core activation with this type of position and exercise variation as well. And then again, we can perform the same thing seated. And this is quite a challenge on the old lateral core. So yeah, don't overload it with too much weight. Again, it's effectively a seated shoulder press. You are pressing outwards very slightly, but just the core requirements to stabilize your torso, to provide that stable base from which to press against, is quite a challenge. Now, shoulder to shoulder press is another nice variation. Effectively, we're going to hold the end of the bar in both hands, and effectively we're going to be pressing it from one shoulder up and over the head and then bringing it down to the other shoulder. Again, this can be done seated, split kneeling, standing, and even kind of adding a push press, which I think I'll show you a little bit later. But yeah, this just adds a little bit of kind of side to side movement, but again, we're just holding the bar with both hands at the same time. Now, another good upper body exercise is our single arm bent over row. So in this case, we are supporting the bent over position with the other hand on the thigh, as you see, and then we're going to be performing this row action. And again, you can position the body in a variety of different ways. We can do it at 90 degrees, as we see with the video here. So you're going to be pulling a little bit higher with the elbow, and therefore going to be hitting a little bit more upper back, so retractors, trapezius, and rhomboids. If we go 45 degrees, or even kind of facing directly away, then you can pull the elbow a little bit closer, and then it's going to be a lot more latissimus dorsi activation. Take the supporting hand away, and you're also going to get more lower back for stabilization. Again, sticking with the pulling exercises, we can perform a diagonal upright row. So stood sideways on, this is going to be working delts, upper traps, and our biceps. And effectively, it's a one-hand upright row where we're pulling upwards and slightly outwards. Again, you're going to be working a little bit of lateral core for stabilization as well. And this is a nice little lead-in to the following exercise. The diagonal high pull's a little bit more dynamic. We take the bar from a lower position, and it's effectively a combination of a lift or squat with a upright row or diagonal upright row movement. So we're pulling from the floor kind of up and across the body and outwards. So again, I'm going to be working deltoids, upper traps, lats a little bit, biceps, and also the kind of hip and leg musculature as well for the first phase of that exercise. So we'll look at some specific lower body exercises now. So we have front squats, squat push press, lateral lunges, crossover squats, skater squats, and pinch grip deadlifts. So the front squat, obviously our squat movement pattern is going to be working predominantly quads, a little bit of glutes as well. So we hold the bar with both hands, usually on the chest, and going to squat down, keeping the feet flat, knees tracking over the shoelaces, and lowering the hips down towards the heels. Having the weight in front and having this bar actually helps a lot of people reach a deeper depth and therefore greater range of motion than if you're performing it with just a standard free weight. We can obviously integrate that front squat then into a push motion. So we could do, you see here, this squat push press, holding it with both hands in front. Again, we could add that shoulder to shoulder press as well if we wanted to. So we start with the bar on one shoulder, squat down, and then as we come up, pressing it overhead and dropping it down to the opposite shoulder. This can obviously be performed with the handle as well. And then moving on to lateral lunges. So we're adding the actual steps, a little bit more ground reaction forces now. And we also have more frontal plane stress that we have to control. So it's going to be, again, all the squatting muscles, the quads, glutes, a little bit hamstrings. But now we're in particular adding a bit more abductor and adductor activation. Now you can hold the end of the bar on the chest, as we see here, or we'll show you another variation in a second where we hold it a little. So here we see the same exercise being performed with the hands kind of by the hips, and this allows us to maybe reach a little bit lower down, and if you want to, you can also kind of hold it one hand at a time if you find that more comfortable. So you might just only have enough room to kind of move to one side, in which case you might want to hold it in the opposite hand. So if you're lunging to the right, you'd hold it in the left hand and perform the action that way. Then we have reverse crossover squat or reverse crossover lunges, if you want to call them that, where we're stepping backwards and across. So effectively you're almost performing like a curtsy style squat. And again, we can hold the bar on the chest. In this case, as you see with the video, we're holding it in the opposite hand down by the hips. So this is really going to help to overload the hip abductor musculature, get a little bit of adductor as well, but predominantly we're really looking at firing up the hip abductors. We can also perform exercises like skater squats, which is where we have a nice wide stance. You're not actually lunging now, but you're trying to maintain a nice low position, simply moving the bar from side to side. And again, as you can see, we're holding the bar down by the hips rather than on the chest, but either are perfectly acceptable, whichever you find more comfortable really. And this is going to be, again, a lot of adductor strengthening and mobilization work. It's less ground reaction forces than we had with our lateral lunge, but it's going to be getting a lot of the similar benefits. And then moving on to more lift pattern movement. So we're looking at a little bit more hips now. And here we have a pinch grip deadlift. So we pop the plates on the end of the bar, and it's gripping the plates with a pinch grip. In this case, we're doing it with two hands. So very good for strengthening the forearm and hand musculature, which will carry over to a lot of particular sports and certain vocations or jobs as well. And then we can perform that one hand at a time. In this case, we're going to show you when we're actually alternating hands, and we're actually dropping it, and then before it touches the ground, we're catching it. So really going to overload the grip and hand musculature and the forearm muscles as you're trying to catch that weight plate on the way down before it touches the floor. And then just to finish off, show you a few other exercises. We have shoulder rotation, low windmill, supine vintage press, and a half Turkish get-up. So the shoulder rotation, we're looking at training the rotator cuff muscles of the deep muscles of the shoulder. So effectively keeping the elbow nice and close, and you're performing internal and external rotation. You really don't need much weight with this one. It is quite challenging, obviously, because we're only using kind of deep stabilizer muscles here. So really don't kind of put too much weight on. This is a good one, like I said, just to strengthen those shoulder stabilizers. Then have our low windmill. So the windmill you might perform with something like a kettlebell, barbell, dumbbell. In this case, we're doing it just holding the end of the bar. So you adopt that standard low windmill position, hand on the end of the bar, other hand up towards the ceiling, and we're pushing that hip back. In particular, we're going to be working lateral hip and lateral core. Obviously, the hand holding the bar is going to get a little bit of grip work going as well, but it's mostly a lateral hip and core exercise. Here we have an unusual one, so what we call a supine vintage press or a figure of four press. So you get yourself into a figure of four position, one hand on the bar, and you're pressing up from this figure of four position. It looks quite a compromised position, it looks quite uncomfortable, but strangely enough in this position it's actually quite good. You have to activate your core well to provide a stable base from which to press against. Being in this slightly rotated position also helps to lift the scapula off the ground of the pressing arm, so you get a little bit more scapular motion, which is what you should do when you kind of perform this type of pressing motion. And then we have our half Turkish get-up. So we can't perform a full Turkish get-up going all the way up into a standing position because it just doesn't work with the core trainer. So what we do here is just coming from a supine position up to a kind of supported seated position, and that's what we refer to as our half Turkish get-up. So arm is extended or straight, the one holding the bar, the same side knee is bent, the other leg is straight, and then the other arm is out to the side on the ground. And then we use that supporting arm to help us use our core to drive us up into this supported seated position. Slowly back down to supine and repeat. So it's a good exercise, so to work the anterior lateral core and also the shoulder and scapular stabilizers. So on application, you want to use the core trainer handle in order to help increase the lever arm for exercises like rotations. For exercises like pressing, then the more horizontal the bar, for example, comparing seated versus standing, then the harder the exercise is going to be for the same weight. You want to adopt a variety of kneeling or split kneeling positions for more varied core activation. And you can also move backwards, such as reverse lunges, or to the side, like lateral lunges, as we've shown you with certain exercises, but not forward. So if you're holding the bar, say, on your hips, yes, we can perform lateral lunges to the side, those crossover lateral lunges. We can perform reverse lunges where we go back, but you can't ever move forward at all. So on the review, presentations, make sure you watch all presentations for this module. For the guided learning practice, complete the guided learning practice for this module, details of which are on the learner management system. Practice the exercise yourself so you're happy with the techniques, and then also practice coaching the exercises to a colleague so you can look to get across the key information. You then want to also complete the guided learning submission for this module. And then the review questions, make sure you complete the review questions for this module to ensure you've met the learning outcomes.